Aynaoui, Executive President, Policy Center for the New South. Larabi Jaïdi, Senior Fellow, Policy Center for the New South. Karim Aynaoui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Voice of God. Merci. Donc, bienvenue à cette...
Welcome to all of you to this closing session. I'll say a few closing remarks at the end of my talk. The idea here is to give you an overview and to give you a glimpse of this fifth edition of our report on African economies, on the specific theme dedicated to this report this year, which is financing, and which was also, in fact, the theme of this Africa Economic Symposium. So the idea is for this yearly report to cover the theme of the symposium, and part of which is related to the economic situation. I have the pleasure of presenting this report with Professor Jaïdi, my friend Larabi, who is a senior fellow at the Policy Center and who is taking the lead for the last 5 years to prepare this report. So what I'm suggesting, Mr. Jaïdi, is to give you an overview of the rationale and philosophy of the report, and then after that I'll ask you a few questions on the key messages and takeaways of the report and the main risks that emanate from the report on the upcoming year and in the medium term. So maybe if you could start out by giving us an idea of the outline, structure, philosophy, and logic, rationale of the report and who is involved in this, in its preparation. Thank you. I will try to be as brief as possible and to also hopefully give you some food for thought and give you a glimpse of the report that will compel you to read it. So this, as Mr. Aynaoui mentioned, this is the fifth edition of the report that is published by the Policy Center for the New South on African economies. And the first question that we asked ourselves is what the value added and what angle of attack could give it an identity, if we can call it as such, given the great diversity of publications and literature available on Africa that are published by international organizations or African institutions or research institutions that are part of academia. So the approach that we thought was the most relevant to give it this distinctive feature is to establish a report where that would take place, where the first step was the analysis. The second was to review the macroeconomic situation in Morocco and Africa and to focus on the main aspects and the what characterized this year compared to the rest. Well, this year was marked, for instance, by inflation and forex variations, and also this macro-financial approach was rather geared on focusing on a sector that would be related to macro-financial issues. And this year we selected the theme of financial inclusion with a zoom on a country, which is unrelated to the general theme. But this year the spotlight was on South Africa. So this is the first macro aspect which allows us to capture the main highlights of the economic situation this year. So maybe before discussing the theme, discussing the report, so how many authors? There are about 24 to 25 authors that penned reports in this report, 10 from Morocco and others from different African regions. So it's not a report of Morocco on Africa, but it is in fact a conscious choice that we made to develop this narrative, this new narrative, and to refrain from developing it from our prism as our Moroccan prism, but to have a co-creation process with other researchers or members of academia in African countries. So it's this openness towards Africa, given its geographic diversity, but also diversity from an analytical standpoint. The second level is to question, to raise the question of what is happening in African economies, take into consideration the 8 regional economic communities, because the RECs in these regions and the situation doesn't necessarily change drastically in these different RECs, but to see what are the main trends, maybe the main steps forward or steps back that marked the African economies. And this year, we try to analyze or review the countries that had submitted this application for single currency. How are they approaching this project? I mean, it's the case of ECOWAS. It is also the case of the SADC, the East African Community, and whatnot, because this issue of this currency is paramount, and so this monetary sovereignty in Africa is very important in this upheaval that the continent is faced with from a monetary and financial standpoint. But for the African RECs that do not have this common currency project, well, what happens when their financial system it changes and needs greater financing to finance their economies? And how? Well, there are also different projects that are related to the financial and economic integration of these economies around a crucial issue of whether these RECs actually converge macroeconomically and macrofinancially, because this convergence is a prerequisite for a more substantial integration, both financially and economically. So this is the aspect pertaining to this second chunk of the report. The third is the opening up to the continent with all of the issues that are related both to the international financial architecture and its impact on Africa, but also on the financing needs of Africa. But these financing needs, well, we all know that there are many international financial organizations that do tremendous work to gauge the needs and to identify the needs. But we wanted to draw inspiration from different types of analyses and reviews, and we wanted to see which are the crucial sectors for the transformation of Africa. There's climate change, green transition. There's also the digital transformation and what financing it requires, what regulations are required, and third is the social transformation through financial inclusion, but not only from the prism of generalization of access to finance, but also and especially to see how fintechs and the new financial products are conducive to greater involvement in the financial sector, and to have the spin-off of savings, greater savings for African citizens. So maybe for final words, what are the 2 or 3 main risks or opportunities as well? So yes, absolutely, risks and opportunities that we can take away from this report. I will select a few that I will share with you. These will be just quick flashes, just right to the crux of the issue. I will not delve into the details. So the first is the risk of fracture, of Africa fracturing, and the reason why I chose this term is from the year 2000 to 2015, 2018, pre-COVID, where Africa was considered as on the frontier of growth, and we were in this great enthusiasm of African integration. And today, I believe that the disruptions of the international financial system, or even this turbulence, this financial turbulence that has struck the world, well, does have an impact on Africa's capacity to be empowered and find the resources it needs to grow. So this issue of this fracture in terms of growth, and the fracture in terms of growth is not only related to the capacity of having natural resources or not, because some countries are endowed with these resources and some are not, but how these economic reforms can support these transformation. This second fracture, could we call it well, there are some differences in the trends and growth trends and economic reforms, both at the macro and sectoral level. The second key message some call them the transitions or transitions for transformation. Well, it's a transition of the green transition, and around this question of green transition, we tend to focus on transfers or remittances or transfers that from the outside, from other countries or from international organizations or countries to Africa. But it's important to note that the financing of climate change also bears its share of risk, and it requires regulation not only in terms of new products or financial innovation per se, but the capacity of central banks to regulate the financing of climate change. And this is related to their international commitments. Well, isn't Basel III a huge weight in the possibility for central banks to, especially since the financing of adaptation spans over the very long term. And so this is one of the aspects which is related to the risk of failure of these transitions. And I'm only giving climate change for illustrative purposes, were better regulated and contributed to the financial stabilization of Africa. And unfortunately, this is not started yet. And so if I'm not mistaken, lots of these regulations are established without involving Africa, and so where we see this non-consistency of the discourse of the North, where they're saying, well, we're not financing, because of the discussion around a certain time was whether we should finance projects and programs that are related to either mitigation or adaptation. Everybody's convinced today that it's important to finance mitigation through economic transformation. But how can we mobilize these resources, and how can we proceed with the weighting of the rules of Basel III to be able to do this, and so to be rigorous, but to give a possibility to local banks to further integrate in this financing. What we can see, however, here is that this regulatory pressure that is determined by the advanced countries based on their own challenges, which leads many banks or subsidiaries of European banks or North American banks or other to withdraw from the African market. Yes, absolutely. So this is a fact which connects us with the discussions of the previous panel, where hope was underpinned by the importance of private finance to supplement the financing needs of our country. So there seems to be a real issue here with regulation and how it's conducted, which participation, who's involved, beyond the countries of the G7 to state things simply, or the G20, or even more. So the third.
We hear a lot about financing from external transfers and the broadening of the leeway from public spending. When we speak about private financing, we think of the intervention of international funds. But what about the reform of the banking and finance system in Africa? If we want to finance the private sector, if we want to ensure the private sector is a key actor in the transformation of Africa, we can't make a connection with financing from international institutions. We know that African financing institutions and the financing landscape in Africa is largely based on the weight of commercial banks and not on non-banking systems such as bonds and whatnot. So we need to reflect on how to ensure, if there is development towards greater stability because of international norms, Basel II and III. So what reforms should be carried out in financial systems to meet those needs, and especially to mobilize short-term savings and engage economic transformation? Yeah, there was a question in the previous panel in the connection between the long-term and short-term effects. Thank you so much, Mr. Jaïdi. So this is the latest edition. It will be online next week. It's the fifth edition, says the speaker. It was a tall order to coordinate efforts between 25 authors, and this is a commitment from the Policy Center. This annual report, it goes hand in hand with a geopolitical report. It's an African narrative authored by African experts who worked together, who reflected from Africa. So I think this is an invitation to collaborate with our friends from advanced economies. It's true that coordination is fascinating and difficult, but the coordinator is not the only one working. He's also supported by all the staff, all the coordinating team who works very hard and who make a great efforts and breathe optimism into that work. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We kindly ask the
First of all, I want to congratulate you for such resilience. Development is about resilience, so you passed the first test. We're in good shape.